Hello, everyone, and welcome to Patients Rising's Speaking Truth to ICER webinar today. We're going to get started here in about 1 minute, just to give a few more people a chance to join us, and we'll be right back. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome to Patients Rising University's Lunch and Learn series. On this particular Lunch and Learn series, we are going to be asking you not only to learn, but prepare to engage. This is our first in a series of webinars focused on bringing more patient voices to a little-known entity in Massachusetts called the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, otherwise known as ICER. Now you might be wondering, who the heck are you, Patients Rising? And what do you have to do with Duchenne muscular dystrophy community? And why should I even listen to you? And these are all valid points. So I'm going to take them in order. First of all, who are we? Patients Rising and Patients Rising Now was founded in 2015 by myself and my husband, Jonathan Wilcox. The organizations were formed to stand up for patients, to advocate for their rights, to the treatments they need and deserve, and to tell the truth about healthcare, and ultimately help patients tell the truth about their healthcare. Over the past 4 years, we have grown into 2 organizations focused on education, support, and advocacy across the spectrum of diseases. Now this here you will see is a picture of us just last year on the 5th birthday of our twins, Jackson and James. Now Jonathan no longer works with Patients Rising on the day-to-day business side of things. He works in DC, he's got one of these big government jobs, the Office of Trade and Development. However, he does serve on the board of Patients Rising now. This is me. Now who the heck am I? Well, this is a good question. Most of the time I find myself as the mom of twins who happens to run 2 patient advocacy organizations. Now, prior to moving to DC, I spent almost a decade as the director of content and briefly as the executive director of Vital Options International, which was an organization with the mission to generate global cancer conversations. Now, it was here where I spent a majority of my time researching and producing videos about new medical innovation, specifically in cancer. This experience formed my strong support for not only the need for more medical research, but in-depth knowledge about the resources, time, and financial risk involved in making it happen. Now, after working side by side on a project called Understanding Cancer, my husband and myself did that together. Our lives were changed forever. The project took us all over rural America, filming the real stories of cancer patients and the struggles they experienced around access to care and innovation. We met patients living with common cancers and the rarest of rare cancers, all of them hoping for more time, more energy, and a longer life with those they love. Now, here's a little bit about my own story. There's many stories I could tell you within my family and many stories over the year, but on the personal side of things, this is my Aunt Kathy that you'll see in the picture. She was born in 1949. She was mentally and physically disabled. She was a child during a time when children with any sort of disability or special need were sent home as being too disruptive in school. Now, public schools were not equipped for Kathy. Kathy had grand mal seizures her entire life. And those grand mal seizures are what actually led to her physical disability. There was no cure for the seizures beyond keeping her comatose, which my mama, as I like to call her, hated because it made the daughter she loved, in her words, disappear. It's not the Kathy I know, she used to say. And she hated it so much, she often would not follow doctor's orders because of it. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. Kathy passed away on January 8th, 2015, and though they lessened the more they ravished her body, no cure or even acceptable medicine was ever found for Kathy. I tell you this story because I may reference it again during this talk to highlight some of the things ICER tries to analyze that it cannot see, and more importantly, does not want to try to. Whoops. Let's go forward. Here we go. Sorry about that. Now, who is ICER? Now, according to their website, they were founded in 2006, and they are an independent and nonpartisan research organization that objectively evaluates clinical and economic value of prescription drugs, medical tests, and other healthcare and healthcare delivery innovations. ICER conducts rigorous analysis of all clinical data and publicly convenes key stakeholders, including patients, doctors, life science companies, private insurers, and the government, to translate this evidence into policy decisions that lead to a more effective, efficient, and just healthcare system. Now, I do take issue with some of that, but I'm not going to get into that now. And you might ask the question at this point, now, who gave Patients Rising the authority to counter this? Well, the answer is no one, but no one gave ICER the authority to do what they are doing either. And that is our point. We do not have anything directly to do with the Duchenne muscular dystrophy community, but we are a non-disease specific organization. But one of the things that banner gives us as a non-disease specific organization is the opportunity to watch ICER in ways no one else is doing. We comment and engage regardless of funding, and we have made that commitment from the very beginning when we started engaging with ICER in 2016. And as for Duchenne, we did write a piece on our website in 2016 during the FDA approval of the first Duchenne medicine. Olivia can provide a link in the comments of the webinar. And before we meet our guests, I want to share some of this with you now, because I wrote this 3 years ago. Let's just keep in mind, before ICER was talking about reviewing Duchenne, before that many people even knew about ICER, before patient advocates were generally engaged with ICER. I wrote, this treatment on trial before the FDA Advisory Committee proved optimistic to the few boys able to enroll in the small trial, and yet it is only for 13% of Duchenne patients. Depending on what statistics you read, that's less than 3,000 boys in the US. And yet there were families from the UK in the room willing to move here. I want to stress that again, willing to move here if it was approved. I went on to write, encouraging innovation and pushing beyond what we think is possible despite the bumpy road ahead. This is why we founded Patients Rising. New treatments are discovered only to realize the journey to access can be equally as long and full of potholes. And this is why we should all fight. And here is where I bring in ICER, because I bring in ICER here 3 years ago. Before ICER brought in ICER, I wrote, the cynical side of me wonders what their QALY number would be. And what I mean by that is a Duchenne patient's QALY number would be. Would value frameworks like ICER find them worth the cost of treatment? With only 13% of the roughly 20,000 US Duchenne patients expected to benefit from the drug, the cost of keeping them walking longer and living better would most certainly rise above the present $35,000 per year. Would they deem their lives worth it? I focus in on a quote from Dr. Bruce, and I'm not going to pronounce his last name because at the time I didn't have to pronounce it, and I can't. So it starts with an O. I'm going to call him Dr. Bruce O., chairman of the Neurology and Medical University of South Carolina. He voted against approval, but gave this caveat. Based on all I heard, the drug definitely works, but the question was framed differently. And finally, a quote from the lead investigator. The study's lead investigator, Dr. Jerry Mendel, director of the Center for Gene Therapy at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, said, 15-year-old boys like Billy don't maintain ambulation by accident. No, they don't. And yes, we need more data. And yes, we need better trial designs. And of course, more innovation. But ICER's methodology does nothing more than create more questions, and most certainly does not provide any concrete answers. Now, before we get into meeting our guest, I promise this is the last slide. I would argue that at the center of everything ICER does is the insurance company and PBMs. They have changed their funding and their governing board since we started pointing fingers at them several years ago. But at the end of the day, these reports are created to give insurance companies and PBMs and others a starting point for negotiation for medicines or whether or not they should be covered at all. Now, sure, with the influx, now at this point, with the influx of almost $20 million from the anti-pharmaceutical company hedge fund billionaire named John Arnold, who got his start at Enron, Steve Pearson, who's the guy on the right, he's the founder of ICER, can hide behind the fact that most of their money does come from a foundation. So I stress that now because that comes up a lot when they talk back. To learn more about ICER, I encourage you to follow us at Patients Rising Now and at Patients Rising and the ICER, hashtag ICERWatch, and visit us at ICERwatch.org. Now I'm going to introduce you to our guest. Dr. William Smith is the Pioneer Institute's visiting fellow in life sciences. Dr. Smith has 25 years of experience in government and in corporate roles. His career includes senior staff and positions for the Republican House leadership on Capitol Hill, the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, and the Massachusetts Governor's Office, where he served under Governors Weld and Cellucci. He spent 10 years at Pfizer as Vice President of Public Affairs and Policy, where he was responsible for Pfizer's corporate strategies for the U.S. policy environment. He later served as a consultant to major pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and medical device companies. Dr. Smith earned his PhD in political science with distinction at the Catholic University of America. Welcome, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Terry. Glad to be here.
Now, I'm going to let you take it from here with your explanation.
Yeah, I want to give a little context to why I think ICER is getting more and more attention these days. And part of it has to do with changes in the products coming out of the biopharmaceutical laboratories. And this inverted pyramid explains that. 20 years ago, even before I joined Pfizer, the goal of many, or if not most, biopharmaceutical companies was to find a product that a general practitioner would prescribe, your regular doctor in the office. The patient would then leave the office and go down to the pharmacy and pick up the pills in a plastic bottle. And hopefully it would be for a condition that millions of patients were affected by, high cholesterol, you name it, high blood pressure. And, think of products like Lipitor. That was the blockbuster model for the industry. That was the gold standard that they were trying to find for commercial success. Well, that's been inverted, and for complicated reasons, partly to do with the science. They've mapped the human genome. They've learned more about the human cell. Now the goal of a lot of companies is to find orphan drugs for smaller patient populations, and then charge six-figure prices. You still get your billion-dollar drug, but it's targeted towards a smaller patient population. And I can talk about some of these trends. For example, last year, 34 out of the 59 new drugs approved by the FDA in 2018 were approved for rare or orphan diseases. And that trend is continuing. There were a huge number of orphan indications granted by FDA from 2017 and 2018. 23% of all the orphan indications that have ever been given were granted in those 2 years, going back to 1983. And specialty drugs are growing. Specialty drugs, again, may not be classified as orphan drugs because, for example, there are more than 1 million people who have rheumatoid arthritis and might take a specialty drug to treat it. But specialty drugs generally treat smaller patient populations than, a Lipitor or a blood pressure drug. And the specialty drugs tend to be either injected or infused in a doctor's office. They're not your typical pills in a bottle that you pick up at the pharmacy. So specialty, orphan, and rare disease drugs are growing exponentially.
So this is a sort of twilight time, or, for people living with rare diseases and rare.
We are, I don't think it's exaggeration to say, we are in a revolutionary period in medicine that's as important as the Enlightenment of 500 years ago was to science generally. The mapping of the human genome is going to be spectacular for patients. And again, a quick slide about the rising costs of these rare disease drugs. Specialty drugs have risen from 11% of spending to 43% of spending. Orphan drugs are up from 4% of spending to 10%. And projections are that the median price, list price for an oncology and orphan drug will be more than $100,000 by 2023. My guess is it'll be closer to $200,000. Now, a lot of people have done the Chicken Little routine and said, the sky is falling. We'll never be able to pay for these drugs. I don't agree with that. If you look at the trends, what's happening is the famous blockbuster drugs for millions of patients, such as Lipitor, Nexium, you can go down the list, have gone generic. And the price drops enormously. A prescription for Lipitor would be about $300 a month years ago when it was a branded drug. And now it's about $5 a month because when it's generic. So these patent expirations, the slide says LOE, that means loss of exclusivity. That just means that the patent's expiring, is going to provide enormous savings to the healthcare system. It's projected $95 billion in savings over the next 5 years, with $26 billion in savings this year alone. So I'm optimistic that when you have rare disease drugs that are more expensive, but for smaller patient populations, a lot of the system can absorb those costs because of the patent expirations.
Now we're going to move into the next slide, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this a little bit, but that third box over there, that scares payers to death.
That scares payers to death.
Okay.
And I believe that's why ICER is getting more and more attention.
Okay.
So this growth trend towards specialty and orphan and rare disease drugs, the payers have reacted, and Terry probably knows a lot of these techniques better than I do, but they've reacted with a lot of different policies to try to limit cost. Specialty tiers, co-insurance. They've blocked the use of manufacturer coupons. They've tightened their networks so they can control prices. They've done prior authorization and step therapy. A lot of health plans have gone out and actually bought PBMs to try to get their better discounts. But the box on the bottom right is the one I want to talk about. Some payers are talking about adopting European-style cost-effectiveness studies that use a methodology called quality-adjusted life years, or QALYs.
What is a QALY?
What is a QALY? This is the simplest possible version. These cost-effectiveness studies have economist upon economist with slide rules and calculators, and it's very complex. I'll try to give you what is the common sense, simple version of how this works. A QALY ranks the value of 1 year of life lived in perfect health. And so if you stay alive for a year, longevity, and you live in perfect health, quality of life, you'll get a score of 1. If you, on the other hand, die after 6 months, you'll get a score of 0.5 on the longevity score. So they use this 0 to 1 score. And then, so for example, let's show how they use the score to rank an oncology drug, for example. Say a new oncology drug comes on the market, and over the current standard of care, it provides for 6 additional months of life. It extends life by 6 months, but it has significant side effects. The patient's still in pain or still has to do chemo. And so it doesn't either get a perfect quality of life score. It gets a 0.5. Well, you combine the 0.5 score for the extension of life with the 0.5 score for quality of life, and you get an overall score of 0.5. Then what ICER does is ICER says, what is the value of a year of life? And they give it a value of between $100,000 and $150,000. They say that's what a year of life is worth. So when you go back to this oncology drug, it got a score of 0.5. If you multiply 100,000 to 150,000 by 0.5, you get a score, a QALY score for this particular drug of $50,000 to $75,000. And what that means is if the price of that drug is below $50,000, ICER says that it's a good value. If the price of that drug is between $50,000 to $75,000 for a year of therapy, ICER says it's an intermediate value. And if the price is higher than $75,000, ICER ranks this particular drug as a low value and doesn't recommend that payers use it. QALYs are used extensively in Europe. Germany's one exception. They're used very aggressively in the United Kingdom. And if you go back and look at the history, the United Kingdom developed the worst quality of cancer care in all of Europe. And Parliament had to step in 2011 and say, no more QALYs. We're going to start paying for the latest cancer treatments because we can't be dead last in cancer care. So QALYs used in the wrong way can have this very detrimental effect on the quality of care.
Yeah, and that can be so debilitating for people or so scary for people in this community because, or any community, especially a rare disease community, because it's like, without knowing you, this arbitrary group of people in a room are putting a dollar value on your life.
Exactly. Some guy with a calculator that you've never seen before.
Right.
And so some payers in the U.S. are starting to hint that they might use the QALY methodology in putting together their formularies. CVS announced at one point that they were explicitly going to use QALYs, and they were going to lower the threshold to 100,000, not a value of a human life, not 100 to 150, but just 100. Now, someone told me that that's now on hold, and I'm not sure what the current status is, but they haven't moved forward. They're sort of in a holding pattern. New York State Medicaid has threatened to use QALYs with drugs that are particularly costly, and they applied quality methodology to one Vertex drug for cystic fibrosis, but they haven't used it pervasively throughout the system yet. Mass Health, the Mass Medicaid program, the Medicaid director there has said they would like to start using cost effectiveness reviews for some drugs, but they haven't mentioned ICER by name. So there's smoke more than fire at this point, but it is concerning, particularly in these Medicaid programs where patients can't walk with their feet and join another plan. That it's really the plan of last resort.
Well, right, because when you're looking at a lot of these rare disease patients, and I know in talking to a Duchenne mom just last week, I mean, a majority of these patients are on Medicaid.
Absolutely.
They need Medicaid. So this, permeating through the states is scary for
It is scary
for this community.
So I found
what are the limitations?
Yeah, I found a good article from 2016 from the Journal of Stem Cell Research, which argued that you can put the criticisms of ICER in three baskets: ethical concerns, which probably are the most important; methodological, where they don't really manage the data correctly; and contextual, where they don't take different populations and the unique features of unique patients into consideration. So the ethical ones, considerations may be the most obvious. So should patients be denied a new drug until a quality review has been conducted? This was a great issue in Great Britain because the quality reviews couldn't keep up with the number of drugs that were coming out, and many cancer drugs that were thought to be real breakthroughs were not made available to patients in Great Britain until the review was done, which sometimes took years. I
know this was a huge thing with Herceptin. I mean, UK didn't get Herceptin.
Exactly. It was a huge problem, and it created great controversy. And I don't know how you can consider it ethical to deny a new revolutionary breakthrough drug that's shown to be effective in clinical trials until a bunch of economists get together and do a cost effectiveness review. I just don't see that as ethical. Quality reviews, of course, interfere with physician judgment. The physicians know their patients better than anybody, not somebody, again, with a calculator in an office. Does the quality threshold, so they say that the value of human life is $100,000 to $150,000. I read the Bible and the Old Testament, and I didn't see Moses come down from Mount Sinai with the 100 to 150,000 number. I don't know where that comes from. It seems wholly arbitrary to me. I don't know how you can, in particular, use that number for all patients and all conditions. It just doesn't make sense to me. It seems very subjective. And some critics argue that QALYs are simply a fig leaf for healthcare rationing. It's just an excuse to do rationing. And quality reviews seem insensitive to the real-world experiences of patients, and I can talk about that.
And that is absolutely what we agree with right there.
Yeah. So there are methodological limitations of QALYs, but with rare disease in particular, rare disease drugs are sometimes approved with very few patients in clinical trials. They don't know how long the therapy is going to be effective. And in Germany, for example, what they do is they let the drug be priced any way the manufacturer would like, and then they wait a year before they do the cost effectiveness reviews. They put it on the market. They allow the price to be whatever the manufacturer sets, and then they put it on the market for a year, and then they have some robust data that they can look at. ICER doesn't do that. ICER sometimes conduct reviews. We'll put out a review the day the drug is approved by the FDA.
They have put out reviews before or put drugs on a review, even with this one coming up for Duchenne, the drug's not approved.
Precisely.
It's crazy.
It's crazy, and it's on very limited data. And what they tend to be very confident that the data is not very robust from a clinical perspective, but then they're also very confident that they know it's not cost effective.
Well, I just said that in the Duchenne review. I mean, we did our comments, and it was completely, we're agreeing with them on some point. The data is limited. There's limited data. There's limited data. There's limited data. We agree with them, and then they get to the end where they're setting a price, or they're speaking about what it should be worth, and they're very confident in their data. And I'm like, how can you be confident in your own data when you're saying throughout the whole thing there's no data? It's just ridiculous.
Precisely. So we don't have to go into all these boxes, but just there are economists who've pointed out there are problems with the methodology used by ICER.
So what are our contextual Contextual
The
limitations.
contextuals, I think this set of criticisms comes in second to the ethical ones, because there are particular patient populations that are disadvantaged by this model. For example, oncology patients. And unless a new oncology drug gives a full year of life, it's not going to get a perfect score under the ICER criteria. And I know there are a lot of terminal cancer patients that probably would like 9 more months of life. And the fact that a drug that gives 9 more months of life doesn't achieve a perfect score, I'm not sure the oncology community is completely happy with that. Same with the disability community. So, disabled patients, if you have a permanent disability and ICER's measuring a drug for quality of life, it's unlikely the drug is going to restore you to perfect health. But it could improve your quality of life dramatically in a variety of ways. Yet, because it doesn't restore you to perfect quality of life, it's not going to get a perfect score. And to me, if a drug allowed somebody to get out of bed, to move around, to use their arms in a way that they couldn't before, why should that drug get a lower score? So the disability community, I think it's even possible that the use of QALYs is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And then there are other patient populations, older people. The longevity criteria may discriminate against them. What about preventative medicines that you might take where you can't really measure quality of life and longevity, but maybe it has great value? Is there a bias against that? And with rare disease patients, a one size fits all 100,000 to 150,000 model just does not work. The variety and diversity and challenges in the rare disease community are so diverse, I don't think you can capture it in one model.
No, and I mean, it's getting to where you can't capture that in so many things. I'm always saying, there's not going to be a cure for cancer. There's going to be like many cures. Right. There's going to be many avenues to get to where we need to go, and to try to put everybody in a box with some sort of formula. It's ludicrous.
And I also think personalized medicine is eventually going to make this model obsolete, because if you can do very refined genetic tests and find out where a medicine is going to be extremely effective for patients, the value for that medicine for that patient population is going to be different than for other patients. And the one size fits all model doesn't work.
So what about the framework for ultra rare diseases? I know this is what we're in.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into this in great detail. I read the new framework they put out. They said, we're going to treat rare diseases different. We're going to have a new framework. To me, the framework looks exactly the same. They haven't really done much. They're unwilling to change the 100 to 150,000, although they say, we may raise the threshold to 500,000 in some cases, but we're going to have a panel vote on it. So to me, they also said, well, there are a lot of contextual factors, caregivers and things like that with rare diseases. So maybe we'll consider those, but they consider it as an aside. They don't bake it into the model. So if there's enormous savings in caregiving or disability or nursing home costs, they will not put that value into the quality of the drug. They'll just do a side write-up about it.
Which is just so silly. I mean, even pointing back to my aunt and my grandmother taking care of her for all those years. I mean, the amount of expense that my grandmother had to go through with what she, on a daily basis, transporting, especially as she became more disabled, it was unreal.
Precisely.
And to not be able to have that anything more than a footnote for patients and caregivers is just
precisely. What if I've talked to one economist who said, what if caregivers could make $75,000 a year and go back into the workforce? Why isn't that value included into the medicine if the medicine allowed that to happen? And ICER just won't consider it because it would make medicines more valuable, which is not what they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. We've had these conversations for years now on different panels that we've done all over the country, and it's like, well, what about the patient who's running a company and employs 25 people or 50 people?
Precisely.
And what happens when they don't do that anymore? What happens to all those people? I mean, I understand that that's hard to put into a formula. Yeah, but maybe that's the point.
Right. That is the point. So the ICER, I concentrate on this rare disease framework because my office is up near Cambridge, Massachusetts, where so much wonderful work is going on in gene therapy and cell therapy, and so many breakthroughs. We're on the brink of so many wonderful breakthroughs for terrible diseases like sickle cell and hemophilia, and the list is very long. And I don't want the ICER framework to limit that kind of innovation. And so I tend to focus on this framework.
All right.
And I think my concerns about the ICER's treatment of rare disease drugs was borne out in a health affairs study that came out last year, where they looked at all the ICER committee votes from 2014 to 2018. And they're out of 48 drugs that they reviewed, 5 were rare disease drugs. And of those 5, 0 got a high value rating. 4 of the 5 were rated a low value, and 1 drug, I think it was Luxturna, for a rare form of blindness, it restores eyesight to people with a rare form of blindness, and yet they ranked it as only an intermediate value. So I think ICER's got real challenges with their model in rare diseases, and the model is, because of the way it's structured, particularly biased against people with rare diseases.
Restoring eyesight. It's only intermediate value.
Exactly. Only of intermediate
only
value.
Intermediate.
Yes.
It's really unreal. And one thing I want to point out before I move on to my next slide, which is sort of our patient section, is that you had just mentioned when we were talking beforehand that actually our Secretary Azar at Health and Human Services is actually on record as not wanting to see the quality used.
Yes. He came to Pioneer and gave a little talk, and I made sure we had a question for him about the ICER and the quality methodology. And he said, with respect to commercial health plans, if they want to use qualities, use it at your peril, because you may degrade your formularies. But he didn't favor a law to ban it for commercial plans. But he had very strong concerns about using it in Medicaid and government health plans, which were many times the plans of last resort, because he said an economist, again, with a calculator, cannot calculate value. The value gets determined by patients and doctors and caregivers and others in the marketplace. That's how value gets sorted out on more on an individual level. And the ICER methodology was interference in that kind of market way that value should be established.
Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all your insights there. I'm going to take us now to our last few minutes, which we were going to have a patient today that we've worked with, and she is going to join us for this particular webinar in the fall when we do the ICER training for the arthritis review. But we don't have her today. And so I'm going to read you something that's in a voice that was written a few years ago, or when we first started working in the ICER space. It's called "I Am Not Worth Less" by a young woman named Jennifer Hinkle. I think this is a really good piece to explain not only a lot of what Bill talked about today and what we were trying to share with you, but it puts it in real patient speak. I mean, because this is her voice. She is a health economist, but she is also a patient, and she's very passionate about the use of the quality. So I'm going to read this now and take a listen. An economic formula that counts sick people as fractions could ration healthcare and penalize cancer patients. But going through cancer has made my life seem more valuable, not less. An organization named ICER, the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, is making big waves in healthcare circles. It calls itself a trusted nonprofit, despite suggestions that it takes significant funding from the health insurance industry. ICER has just released a draft report about treatment for a rare and difficult-to-treat cancer called multiple myeloma. In a few months, it will publish a similar assessment for lung cancer. Medicare is already considering use of ICER's approaches in official policy. ICER's not-so-secret ambition to become the American analog of a group in the United Kingdom called NICE, which is far from nice. NICE rations healthcare and keeps the newest high-tech cancer drugs off the market due to their cost. In fact, the policies of NICE have led the UK to having the poorest overall cancer survival rates in Western Europe. And I'm going to pause here and put a caveat in that this was written several years ago. And Bill actually talked about that, and I'm going to just acknowledge the fact that the UK has actually changed somewhat. And they have an actual different panel for the cancer track so that they can change this, this stigma that they have had. NICE and ICER use fancy math to determine which treatments are worth it and which are not. Their formula are based on the QALY, which we've been talking about all day, an acronym for Quality Adjusted Life Year. As a one-sentence crash course in health economics, the quality is an invented metric that values a healthy year at 1 and then devalues a person's year to a fraction if they are diagnosed with the disease. For example, if ICER's multiple myeloma report, a person with multiple myeloma might have a quality worth only 0.61 to 0.82 instead of 1. In the most basic terms, if you get sick, you become a fraction, and your time no longer has the same value as a fully healthy person's time. In the case of ICER's report, once you're diagnosed with multiple myeloma, your time might be valued as low as 3/5 of a whole. In some quality-based evaluations, a person never recovers full value of their time, even if he or she survives the disease. While using the QALY might be a nice academic exercise, its use becomes discriminatory when it's used to ration care for particular groups of patients or prioritize spending. Use of the QALY becomes downright life-threatening when it is not used to justify when it is used to justify arguments that it's not worth it to treat people with cancer using new drugs that have recently come to market, solely based on the expense of these drugs and the assumption that a sick person's time is worth less. The European Commission looked at how the UK was using the QALY to make decisions on cancer and said, the research provides robust scientific evidence that QALYs produce hugely inconsistent wrong results on which important decisions are being made. Agencies such as NICE should abandon QALY in favor of other approaches, which they did in terms of cancer drugs. Despite these critiques and the inherent unfairness of saying that a sick person has less value than a healthy person, the QALY-based approach of NICE is now the same methodology that ICER is using in the US. If allowed to continue, ICER could provide American insurance companies a basis to deny coverage for drugs, disincentivize investment in cancer science, and leave patients facing the equivalent of some much ballyhooed death panel for the rationing of their care. I'm closely tracking what ICER does for 2 reasons. First, I'm a health economics and policy consultant, so it's my job to analyze developments in the landscape and understand the impact to patients, biotech companies, or doctors. Second, I'm a cancer survivor, and I take enormous offense at the suggestion that at any point in my life, I might have been worth less than 1. In fact, I would argue that my time is more valuable after surviving cancer. As patients or survivors, we are never less valuable than anyone else. I interact with cancer patients and survivors on a daily basis, and not a single one of them would ever say, even on the worst or sickest days, that their life has less value than before their diagnosis. Their families and friends would agree, having cancer does not devalue a person. It does not make someone worth less. The ivory tower methodologists at ICER are putting all of us, past, current, and potential future patients, at risk with their academic, vaguely patriarchal methodology that seeks to say who is worth it and who is not. ICER's authors are neither patients nor practicing physicians. One wonders if anyone writing ICER's reports has ever had a family member or loved one with cancer who had to fight for access to the best and latest treatments in order to survive. In contrasting view, Professor John Harris of the University of Manchester, one of the world's leading biomedical ethicists, has written that use of the QALY requires us to abandon people whose quality of life might be poorer than the more fortunate because formulas using the QALY seek to maximize only life years and not save lives. QALYs have also been demonstrated to be against ageist, sexist, and likely discriminatory against those with lower socioeconomic status, as income and life expectancy are correlated. Professor Harris has called the QALY fatally flawed and suggested that its use has implications for civil rights and unwarranted discrimination. Using the QALY isn't only offensive to patients and survivors such as myself, but has the potential to create life-threatening rationing of healthcare resources to encourage age-based and gender-based discrimination in healthcare policy setting and to exacerbate disparities in survival and access to care that are already borne disproportionately by the poor and minority groups. Patients and the public need to tell ICER that we don't want healthcare to be rationed based on unfair and discriminatory formula. That turns us into fractions and tells us that our lives are worth less. And the moment we are diagnosed with cancer, and I give the caveat, or anything else, especially rare and ultra-rare diseases like Duchenne, which we are talking about today. And as I lead into the next and final screen, I'm going to give you a call to action. Today is June 11th, 2019, and next week, on June 18th, 2019, at 5 o'clock p.m., that is the deadline for you to submit comments to ICER or request to speak publicly at the Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy ICER meeting, which is taking place on July 25th in Boston. I encourage you, if you live in Boston, or if you can travel to Boston easily, to request to speak if you don't have a great fear of public speaking. Because even though it may seem like from the reports that have come out and things that have been said in the media that ICER's already made their decision here, your voice is important. And them hearing your voice is important, because I can tell you, as someone who's been to these meetings and has spoken at one of these meetings in the past, that they don't always bring patients in the room that represent the medicine that represent the report they're talking about. So here's your call to action. Share your story, make it personal. Now, here are some things to think about if you are living with Duchenne, or if you're a caregiver, which is in many cases, there obviously is a caregiver. I know there's many Duchenne moms out there. Describe your disease experience and how it affects your day-to-day life. How does your disease impact your family or caregivers? What effect of this disease would you most want to see improved? How well does your current treatment work at controlling your illness and side effects? Is there innovation emerging you are anticipating? How are they different from these current treatments? What are your experiences with the treatment under review if you have it? And what are your barriers to accessing treatments and clinical trials? Now, don't worry. I just plowed through all of that, but we are going to be sending out to all of you who have participated, and for those, it'll also be available on the patientsrisingu.org website, a simple download that explains how to engage with ICER with these deadlines, with the email address that you're supposed to send to, and all of the things that you need to know in order to engage. And we really, really, really encourage you to do it. And in closing, I close with the fact that all of you out there, patients are the true voices of value. And I'm going to just keep flipping through the screen. All of these are Patients Rising's many voices of value. They've written on our blogs. Some of them have spoken directly with ICER. They're from all across the country. Everything we do at Patients Rising is driven by the voice of the patient. And whether that is our Voices of Value, patient-driven blog, where we let patients be the authors, at Patients Rising, the patient is at the center. It's the center, period. Patients are the only voices of value that truly matter in our space. And it's because we believe that patients should be at the center of this discussion that we formed ICER Watch in 2016, and why we encourage you today to engage. ICER doesn't want to hear from us anymore. We're not going to stop. We're going to keep commenting every time. We're going to keep engaging because we're in a unique place to do that. We do that more than the pharmaceutical industry itself does because they're actually not united. They, if a particular company is not being reviewed, they don't send a comment to ICER. We send a comment to ICER every time. And we encourage you to get as engaged as you would like. I know we went a little bit over, but if you have any questions, Olivia's waving at me. What are your questions?
I have a question from David Norris. He says, I'm midway through a reading of ICER draft report for DMD and see many references to caregiver utilities. Did they exclude these considerations from their final analysis?
I have written, this isn't their final analysis, first of all. So I want to encourage you one thing, David. This isn't their final analysis. This is why this is so important. You are reading a draft evidence report, but there will be a final report. And that final report will come out based on all of the submissions for comments, which is when we comment. We comment during this period. We don't generally comment during the first time that puts the draft evidence report out. We leave that to the real science geeks and the people with a lot more knowledge of the patient population at hand. And like I said, we're an all disease state organization. So we are commenting next week. So what I encourage you to do, if you see that in the report, if there's things that you like or don't like, this is your time to read the report and comment back. This is your time. You have 5 pages. You can 5 pages, 12-point type, Word document, ICER comments, public comments at ICER-review.org. Now, like I said, we'll have that available for download and we'll be sending it to anybody that participated today. But we encourage you to engage in that way. That is why you're reading this and your commenting is so important. Thank you. That helpful? Any others, Libya? Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you all for all of you who participated today. Like I said, we will have something up very shortly on the Patients Rising U website, and we'll be sending something out. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at askaccess@patientsrising.org. That's ask, ASKACCESS at patientsrising.org. That is where you can ask us anything. And you can certainly ask us anything about what we presented today, and we will be happy to answer you. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.